have Zoom fatigue? The article begins. Or is it emotionally and existentially crushing to have to pretend life is normal while hundreds of thousands of people are dying and the world burns? Have you had too much screen time? The article by social psychologist Devon Price continues. Or are you being forced to sit attentively while a litany of terrifying news alerts flash in the periphery of your vision? Have you been doom scrolling? Price asks. Or is your one remaining window to the broader social world an algorithmically poisoned app where everyone is constantly broadcasting their trauma and panic? Are these uncertain times? Or have you lost all hope for the future and no longer have the emotional and psychological lifeline of having something to look forward to can provide? Or is it all of the above? Price concludes their article. I mean, it's probably all of the above. If you are having a hard time, if you are worn out by the barrage of terrible news, if you are losing the capacity to be outraged by inhumane and cruel politics, if you are sick of the racism and sexism and casual indifference to people who are hurting, if you are grieving the deaths of nearly 250,000 Americans, if you are exhausted by the never-ending dumpster fire that is 2020, if your anxiety has been cranked up to an 11, you are not alone. And this week, with the election on Tuesday, all of that is going into overdrive. Of course, it's a little misleading to refer to Tuesday as election day. At this point, in so many places, more people have already voted early, in person or by mailing in their ballots, than voted in total 4 years ago. But still, Tuesday is the official day. When districts try to get some sort of official number as quickly as they can, and the news networks fall over one another trying to be the first to report who won what where. Well, this year, we'll see if the news networks can restrain themselves. Nobody is expecting definitive results Tuesday night, and chances are good it will be days, if not weeks, until a lot of elections are officially concluded. And unfortunately, that goes for the presidential election in particular. Knowing that this is going to be a challenging week to get through, we've put together a growing list of the ways in which you can get away from the news coverage of mostly lacking news, or even worse, doom scrolling, by spending a little time with your fellow UUs, whether within the UUFP or through the wider UU world. From the forums and services this Sunday and next, to morning and afternoon check-ins, from virtual sanctuaries and listening circles to Moral Monday and a UUA vigil, there are plenty of opportunities to encourage one another, to share our hopes and fears, and to lift up our vision of beloved community. Most of them are there for you to drop into as is convenient to you. So please look for the email I sent out yesterday or for the Facebook event with the growing list. As always, companionship makes it easier to get through a difficult time. Nobody, thankfully, says that we must do it alone. I know how much I have relied on family, friends, and the UFP during the last 4 years, and this year in particular, to keep going, to get up, to fight another day. So in today's service, after our next hymn, we're going to take some time to bring that companionship alive in a ritual of caring created by the Reverend Erica Hewitt, who runs the fabulous resource of UU worship materials known as Worship Web. The ritual is known as holding the hope for one another. And we've used it a couple of times in services before, when I had you write on pieces of card, and then we gathered them up to share our hopes with one another. Obviously, that's not going to work here on Zoom, so I've adapted the ritual a little, and we'll use Mentimeter to share our hopes. I'll talk more about that later. Actually, sharing our hopes is the second part of it. The first part is to think about our struggles. For instance, in regards to this election, I've been struggling with the fact that our values, as you use, the things we name in our 7 principles, or wonder, love, service, and generosity as animated by our mission, our values have become political or even partisan. I've realized that I'm genuinely upset that if I talk about wanting a society that, say, prioritizes a healthy environment and gets serious about climate change, a society that serves the majority of people rather than just the ultra rich, a society that refuses to accept 1 in 4 American children going hungry as part of our economy, a society that provides people with the medical care they need regardless of their circumstances. If I want a society that owns up to white supremacy and refuses to allow police to kill Black people like Walter Wallace Jr. any longer, well, I find that I am forced to choose one political party rather than the other because they are on such opposite sides of all of these issues. Rather than agreeing that, yes, climate change is a problem, and then disagreeing about the best ways to tackle it, here in the US, we have a party that officially denies the reality of climate change. That makes us the only country in the world with a major political party that denies climate change. Not, I should stress, the only first world country, the only country, period. And the same goes for systemic racism and heterosexism and economic exploitation. If the policies of one political party essentially deny the humanity of people of color, women, poor people, sick people, immigrants, then how on earth would my values ever let me vote for somebody in that party? And so I'm also struggling with the fact that whenever I preach about these things, what I'm saying about values and issues has pretty clear implications for voting too. If I preach for marriage equality, as I did regularly before Obergefell versus Hodges, and as, unfortunately, I shall likely need to do again before long, and one party supports marriage equality, while the other flatly opposes it and wants to strip same-sex couples of their civil rights, I'm apparently implying support of the former party and not the latter. Now, this isn't a new problem to me by any means. It's been going on for a long time, even before the time I was born. As an elder colleague and well-regarded UU preacher, the Reverend David Rankin wrote, in 1968, I delivered a sermon prior to the presidential election. It was not a partisan plea, since I was not overly impressed with either Richard Nixon or Hubert Humphrey. Instead, I merely recommended at the conclusion of the sermon that I hoped everyone would vote for the most intelligent, experienced, and compassionate candidate. So imagine my surprise when a man confronted me in the reception line and angrily shouted, "How dare you use the pulpit to support Hubert Humphrey?" In short, my struggle right now is that I really resent having no real voting choice when it comes to seeing my values realized in the world. So what is the hope that lives within me in this struggle? Well, my hope is that change is happening anyway. In one of his recent shows, John Oliver talked about how thoroughly unrepresentative the US Senate actually is. I mean, demographically, it's not even close. Out of 100 senators, only 26 are women, which is the most in the Senate's history, but still only half of what that number should be. And out of 100, only 9 senators are people of color, and only 2 identify as LGBTQ. But in terms of how many people the senators represent, that's not remotely fair either, given that about 2/3 of the senators represent about 1/3 of the US population. And unfortunately, that's a big deal when it comes to things like judicial appointments and impeachment trials. On the other hand, the majority of the population that isn't being fairly represented in Congress is still the majority of the population. And there's lots of hope to be found in that. More people than ever now support Black Lives Matter. And there's also been a big shift in consciousness when it comes to climate change too. You do any sort of survey with just about any business these days, there are more than just male and female as options for gender. Businesses, universities, and other institutions are responding to that growing public awareness, whether it's addressing white supremacy within their own ranks or shifting investments from fossil fuels to renewables. It won't be easy, and it may be painful, but I believe that our society is moving in the right direction, even if some small parts of it are stubbornly trying to cling to a privileged past. As we go into this election week, as we face the radical uncertainty of this year's elections, my prayer is that we find ways to keep breathing in peace, and to keep breathing out love. I'm not saying that we need to be okay, much less happy, with all of the election results, whatever they will be. And as with any major event, we need to hope for the best and prepare for the worst. Rather, if we're going to be able to get through this, if we're going to be able to not only rely on, but also be reliable for family, friends, and the UUFP, then we need to both celebrate what went our way and acknowledge what didn't, and then find the inner peace and the willingness to love that we need to move forward. This week, the election happens, and after the election, then the real work begins. May it be so.